Good morning, everyone. Hope you're having a fantastic Friday. I'm Dennis Washington. Richard Hart, pulpit minister at Deerfoot Church of Christ, joining me this morning. Good morning, Richard.
Morning, Dennis.
How are you this morning?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful morning. I'm actually experiencing the morning with the birds around me today, so we're changing things up a little bit.
You're planting and watering today in reality, is what it sounds like. That's
right,
fantastic.
Right. And I actually got a plant behind me that needs water desperately, and you'll hear a little bit more about that in just a moment.
That is fantastic. I love it. Well, let's jump right into our show today. The topic being the belt of truth. You started a series this past Sunday talking about the armor of God, a bigger series, and started with the belt of truth. Tell us a little bit about why you started the series with a sermon on the belt of truth.
Right. We're actually in a larger focus this year on as iron sharpens iron, so does one man sharpen another. And if any of you have ever tried to keep a blade sharp, it has to be a good piece of metal, and so it needs to be as strong as iron. And so the idea is that we're not going to be able to be sharp for the Lord if we're not as strong as iron. And so we went to Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 10 and saw where he says, "Finally, brethren, I wish that you would be strong in the Lord in the strength of his might." And so recognizing that we can be as strong as iron, and we have to, in order to do that, he says, take up the full armor of God. He doesn't leave it up to us as to what we think is going to be strong or not. And so taking up the full armor of God is something that's important. And recognizing that we don't come up with what the armor is either. And so verse 14 is where he says, put on, having fastened on the belt of truth, and that is the first part of the gospel armor. So this is the first part of our being able to discuss the culmination of our year, and I'm excited about it because of that.
Absolutely. No, I think this is a really neat, the armor of God has always been interesting to me, and when you start to break down the elements and see how they're all connected to each other, but how individually they can help us. I mean, I just think that's fantastic. I want to start with a clip. One of the clips from your sermon this past Sunday, you talked about giving someone a Bible and how, more importantly, how to be prepared when there's an opportunity to show your belt of truth. Let me play that, then I want to get everybody's thoughts on that.
This one occasion that he and this guy Darius were getting in a conversation, and Darius said, "Richard, you need to give Eric a Bible." And I just took it out of my pocket and I gave it to him, and they went, "Oh, he has a Bible with him," and that ended the conversation. And he really didn't mess with me that much after the fact that I had a Bible with me. The idea is, it's not just keeping the Bible with you, it's not just keeping it on your person. That can help you in situations. But it's making sure that you're putting that word within your heart, making sure that it is girded around you to protect you because of the enemy. And it is not Eric. The enemy is not those that you're in your coworkers. The enemy is the devil, as we have already seen. And he is scheming. He has many wiles, and he's striving to destroy us. He doesn't want us to be strong.
Richard, I love that concept, and it kind of reminds me of my upbringing in the Boy Scouts with the whole concept of being prepared. I mean, that's really the bottom line here, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, if I'd have thought of that, I would have brought my hatchet. Maybe that, on the side of the hatchet says "Be prepared," right? And making sure that blade is sharp, which gets us to iron sharpens iron, and being as strong as iron. If you're not sharp, you're not going to be prepared. And so being sharpened with the belt of truth is, we need to know the truth and make sure that it's not just in a book on the shelf. And actually, it's interesting. I mentioned on Sunday in Psalm 119 in verse 11, David says, "Thy word I've hidden in my heart that I might not sin against you." And so his word is not just in a scroll for David. It was actually within his heart. And that's how he was a man after God's own heart.
Oh, what a great connection there. I mean, you're right. Instead of just sticking the Bible in a book somewhere on a shelf, if you've got it in your heart, it's always with you. I mean, it's good to have, obviously, as you demonstrated, it's good to have an actual copy that you can hand someone so they can start to read it and get it put on their heart. But, at least carrying it around in your heart all the time is really the key. It's not just a book that sits on your shelf. Absolutely, absolutely love that. There was another part in your sermon where you talked about the interaction between Jesus and Pilate, and you called this as if you called it the saddest verse in the Bible. I want to play this, and then I want to get your reaction to it.
Pilate is standing there talking to the truth, and the truth is telling him he bears witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to his voice. And the saddest verse in Scripture is verse 38. What does Pilate say? Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" Pilate doesn't even recognize that truth is. He doesn't see that there could be this thing called truth. He doesn't recognize it. He doesn't recognize that truth is standing right there in front of him. The idea of truth means that we are sure. It is something that is sure. It is something that is constant, that is unchanging. But we live in a world that is unsure, that is inconsistent, and is always changing.
Richard, let me just ask you it this way: why is that the saddest verse in the Bible?
Well, the word there for truth, it means a reality that is firm and sure. A reality that is firm and sure. So let's just plug that in to the reality that Jesus is on trial, standing before Pilate. That is what is reality. There is truth and there is the lie. Truth is Jesus is innocent. And I think it's interesting that Pilate is actually asking the question, what is truth? He doesn't recognize that there is a reality that is firm and sure. And you've got him as your judge.
Yeah.
When the rubber meets the road, if we're questioning what is truth, and truth is just relative, it's something that you can come up with or I can come up with, everything's fine until reality sets in. Because say you are on you're about to be judged, you're on the judgment seat, and you have a judge there that is like Pilate, and he asks the question, what is truth? Oh, truth is I'm innocent.
Right.
Well, I don't know, because I think that I kind of like this group over here, and I kind of like to cater to what they want, and that means you're going to go away to jail for life. Or in Jesus' case, he ended up going to the cross to die. Yeah. And so actually the very next phrase, Pilate said to him, what is truth? And after he said this, he went back outside to the Jews and told them, I find no guilt in him. He has just said what is truth, but yet he recognized that Jesus wasn't guilty. So he made that decision, but then he says, because of his lack of reality, thought he could just wash his hands, and he still sends him to the death. You see, that's the kind of judge that is there's no justice.
No.
There.
No, that's not the kind of judge I want. If I'm ever in a courtroom, that's not the kind of guy I want judging me at all. You know, when we were discussing this before the show, I brought up I forget how many years ago, one of the Batman movies, the Bane
right.
and the Kangaroo Court. I mean, they just kind of made up their own rules and decided what was truth and what was not. I mean, I know it's a secular reference here, but it's kind of the same principle. You don't want some of these people being your judge because their definition of truth isn't truth. It's not what God says. So it's such a. And I guess to that idea of the saddest verse in the Bible, I guess, when you think about it, it is so sad that Pilate could not recognize that truth was standing right there in front of him.
Well, exactly. And that's why in John 14:6, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And no one comes to the Father except through me. So when he's saying I am, in the book of John, there are actually 7 I am statements. And it's interesting, when Moses asks God, who will I say has sent me, when he's going into Egypt to let God's people go, what does God say to him? He says, I am who I am. He says, tell them I am has sent you. So Jesus when he's saying I am there, he's referring to his deity, that he is God's son. He's saying, I am the way, the truth. So the fact is, the truth is standing there in front of Pilate. And he asks the question, what is truth? And how many of us have Jesus standing right in front of us, and we're asking that same question? That's why this is the sad thing. He is before the greatest judge.
Yeah.
And he thinks he can judge God in the flesh. But he doesn't even recognize that he has truth, and it is standing there. And we all have a choice whether we're going to choose Pilate's perspective or Jesus' perspective. And we have a picture of justice right here, and it's powerful.
It is powerful. It absolutely is. And as sad as that is, I want to finish up with one more clip from your sermon where you describe this picture of heaven that I just think was a fantastic way to think of heaven in this entire context. Let's take a listen.
At judgment, he's going to, for those who are faithful, he's going to gird himself around with a towel, and he will serve those who've served him. This is the picture of rest from Jesus the Christ. The picture of him serving his disciples and his disciples serving others. That's the picture of heaven. What heaven is going to be like. So when we take part in that and we serve other people, we put others before ourselves. That is a picture of heaven to someone else. And people will see that we're wearing the belt of truth. They will see that we are dressed for action, that we are protected and we are prepared.
I love this concept of servant leadership in essence here. And the irony is the judge is the servant. He's serving us in essence of what you're saying here. And I guess it's kind of hard for a lot of people to really wrap their brain around that the guy that can sit in judgment and is truth is serving us. I mean, explain that a little bit more, how that works.
Well, I think it's interesting to wrap our brain around, and actually it's interesting, he's telling us to wrap the truth around us. Making sure, sometimes we're not going to even understand it, but realize that he said it, therefore I believe it, and I'm going to do it. And it's the reason I say wrap the truth around us is verse 35 of Luke 12. He says, stay dressed for action. He actually is referring to dress yourself, to gird yourself around and for action. And it's this idea of the belt of truth that is put around us. It's the same word that is used for the belt of truth. Keeping yourself ready for action. And notice in verse 37, he says, blessed are those servants whom the master finds awake when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will dress himself for service. So dress himself, it literally, he will gird himself about with a belt. But his belt is of service, which is exactly the word used in John 13:4 when he girds himself about with a towel. A towel to serve his disciples. He went around and he washed their feet as they were eating. Peter himself said, Lord, will you wash my feet? And he says, no, Lord, you cannot wash my feet. And Jesus says, if you will not allow me to wash your feet, you will have no part in me. He says, then Lord, wash my feet and my head also. Peter shows this great picture of, no, Jesus, you can't wash my feet. But Jesus was saying, I've got to wash your feet.
Right.
What's the picture here is Jesus is willing to serve them as the master, like you're saying, as the judge, willing to serve his disciples.
Right.
For us, when we have been working, and just a few weeks ago, we talked about what is our feet's desire, or our foot's desire, if you will, to take the gospel message. How beautiful are the feet of those who bring the good news. And you see this picture of people who have served the Lord for their entire lives, and their feet are hurting. Their feet are cracked. Their feet are in pain from serving the Lord.
Right. And
notice this is a picture here in Luke 12 of those who have been ready and dressed for action, that when the servant comes and finds them, he will serve them with a belt. And that is the idea of washing their feet that Jesus does in John 13. And notice it's verse 39, the very next phrase, know this, that if the master of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have left the house to be broken into. You also must be ready, dressed for action, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. He's talking about Judgment Day. He is going to be coming, and we want justice. We want truth, because we're all going to be facing a judge, and that judge is Jesus. Pilate will one day be facing Jesus, who Jesus at one time faced Pilate. And Pilate will recognize truth on that day.
Oh yeah, he won't have a choice that day. I mean, it'll be pretty obvious to him. You know, and
don't we want to realize we choose truth now before that day comes?
Right.
And he's made it possible for us to put on that belt of truth.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. You know, and from a business perspective, there's so much discussion around servant leadership, and not many businesses do this very well. There's a few, but this idea that the guy at the top isn't necessarily, you know, domineering and telling everybody what to do, but really good businesses have servant leadership at the top, where they serve the people that work for the company below them, because if they empower them, they give them the tools they need to be successful, then the business will be successful. And I kind of think there's some similarities here, because you've got a situation where Jesus, in this idea of servant leadership, is serving us, giving us the tools we need to be successful as Christians. It's not going to be perfect. It's not saying that there's not going to be any trials or tribulations, but we're given the tools we need to be successful, to bring other people to know Jesus, to grow the Lord's church, and to eventually make it to heaven. And I think there's a lot of similarities there. But as you pointed out in the end, I mean, you know, even Pilate, who didn't know truth, he's going to know truth when he stands in front of it here, you know, or you know, on Judgment Day.
And just like he had a choice to choose Jesus or not. We all have a choice. You said that we have been given the tools necessary for leadership. We can choose to take up those tools or not. And I think the earthly wisdom would say this, you know, like in the business place, that people are stepping stones to get you to where your success, and you use people. That's wrong. Right. It is a wrong model, and it is unjust. It is impure, but it is earthly wisdom. And a lot of people think they can live that way. Yeah. But, you know, recognizing, say, like this servant leadership, you know, in the church, Paul actually tells us, which gave us our name for our show, Plant and Water, when he said Paul planted, Apollos watered. It almost sounds like he's saying, you see what I planted, you know, you see what I did. Right. But Paul's not saying that. He says Paul planted, Apollos watered, but God provides the increase. And neither he who plants or he who waters is anything but God who gives the growth. He actually shows that, yes, he planted the church there in Corinth, but he's nothing. Yeah. That's servant leadership.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, tell us a little bit about this coming Sunday. For folks that are going to be in town at Deerfoot Church of Christ, what's your plan for this Sunday to talk about?
Well, it's interesting. This past Sunday, we've looked at just the pure science behind the belt of truth. And, you know, looking at what is the belt of truth, and you know, can we put this around us? Can we take this up? Well, that is all well and good. It's something that's important for us. But sometimes I feel like we need to also recognize pure science has applied science as well. It's not just words on a page. And so we're going from the pure science of the word of the belt of truth from last week to applied science of the belt of truth today. So really saying, how do we wear the belt of truth? Yeah. And so one element I actually would like to bring out is the first point, that the word of God is unchanging. And we're going to be looking at Adam and Eve and how she was ready with the word when Satan asked her, can you eat of any of the trees within the garden? She says, we can eat of any of the trees in the garden, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil we shall not eat, for the day that we eat of it, we will surely die. Problem is, she does add, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. And there's a lot of discussion behind why would that be added, because that was never said by God to Adam. But it's interesting, she had the truth there. Because it had been changed by Adam, that actually left her open and vulnerable to give in to the temptation of Satan saying, you will not surely die. He changed the word of God there. And when they did this, when their eyes were open, when the woman had eaten, and when Adam had eaten, their eyes were open, they saw their nakedness, and they were ashamed. What did they do? They took fig leaves and they sewed them together. And if you ever just stopped and thought about their choice of material to be the first tailors and the first seamstress, to fig leaves. And that's actually, you may have noticed this behind me. Here in Alabama, this is the closest to a fig that I could get in my backyard. It was actually readily available, and that's why I chose my backyard.
Right.
You may know this as a kudzu vine.
Yeah.
And I wish I could have had the kudzu that is behind me, behind this fence, but I literally couldn't get signal to it. But just picture it to you. And so I pulled some of these the other day, and you may be able to tell the ones I pulled this morning as opposed to the ones I pulled about 2 days ago. They have remained malleable a little bit, but they're about to turn as brown and gray as can be. The moment they cut those fig leaves and sewed them together, they may have, covered them pretty well, unless they had bugs.
Right.
They may have covered them pretty well for that moment, but the moment that God is talking to them, they have no idea that their material is literally shriveling up and dying. So they sewed, and the reason I brought this out is they sewed fig leaves to make a loincloth. And in the Hebrew there, it could be interchangeable, a belt. The idea is this is a belt to cover them. So their choice of belt is changing. Their choice of belt of covering wasn't going to cover them because it wasn't going to cut it.
Yeah. Yeah.
God has, in his infinite wisdom and mercy and judgment, has made it possible for us to have and procure a belt of truth that we can put around us that is not changing, regardless of culture. However, whatever standard changes in this world, it is unchanging. And that's how we're going to be protected. That's how we're going to be taken care of for the day of judgment. God is not going to change his word.
I love it. I love it. It's fantastic. And you can hear more from Richard this Sunday at 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock at Deerfoot Church of Christ. The address there on the screen, 5348 Old Springville Road in Pinson. You can also go to our website at deerfootcoc.com and get more information there. All right, Richard, it is time for one of our favorite segments of the week, the question of the week. And this week's question is, why did David get anointed to be king?
Yeah, well, that came again from Charlotte Van Horn's second grade class, and as of yesterday, they are completely done. And so I have about 100 questions that the kids have asked on several different occasions, and this is one that I chose for today. And it's interesting, why did God choose David to be anointed? Well, it really starts in 1 Samuel 15 when God says that he rejected Saul. And it's in verse 10, the word of the Lord came to Samuel, I regret that I've made Saul king. He's talking about the first king of Israel. For he has turned back from following me and has not performed my commandments. And Samuel was angry and he cried to the Lord all night. Well, he wasn't going to have to cry very long, because we actually find in chapter 16, verse 1, the Lord said to Samuel, how long will you grieve over Saul, since I've rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided for myself a king among his sons. I think it's interesting that Samuel, even though God had rejected Saul, was mourning over him, because he saw that Saul was the greatest king, and this was his king. He's crying over it. This is saddening to him, but God sees a bigger picture. God sees not what man sees. And in fact, Jesse himself sees, when he thinks about his sons, among all of his sons, he sees who his king is going to be. And so he brings his sons to Samuel. In verse 6, it says, when they came, Samuel looked on Eliab, this is the oldest son of Jesse, and thought, surely the Lord's anointed is before me. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I've rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. And so I think it's interesting. We have a picture of what we talked about before with worldly wisdom, what man sees. We don't want a judge to see as man sees. We want a judge to see as God sees, to be righteous in his judgment and unchanging in truth. Notice then verse 11, then Samuel, he had gone through all of the sons of Jesse. Verse 11, it says, then Samuel said to Jesse, are all your sons here? I mean, God's brought me to anoint one of your sons, and I've seen all your sons. He's not chosen any one of them. Are all your sons here? And he said, there remains yet the youngest, but behold, he's keeping the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, send and get him, for we will not sit down till he comes here. He's saying, I didn't even think you'd consider my youngest son. I mean, he's tending the sheep. He's doing the chores of the sons. You know, I mean, I remember my parents saying, the reason we brought you into this world was to make your bed. So make your bed.
Thanks, Mom and Dad. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thankful. No, I'm very thankful, but for preparing me. But, this is similar to what Jesse's saying. I didn't consider him to be king. Right. Well, God doesn't see as man sees. He sees the heart. And as we saw before, David is a man after God's own heart. But on Sunday, we're going to be looking at David and his perspective, the fact that he did not go to war as the time of kings that would go to war. He stood on the roof of his house and he looked down and he saw Bathsheba and he got distracted and he went against God's law. And what's interesting is the belt of truth it will keep us strong, but it'll also bring us back. So we're going to be looking at what Samuel says, or what Nathan says by this time to David when he says, you're the man, David, and he recognizes it. The truth brings us back, but the truth, God's judgment, also anointed David. I'm so thankful because it was actually through the line of David that we have Jesus, the ultimate judge. And that was God's will, and that was God's providence, so that we have a path to get to him.
I love it. That's fantastic. Richard, if anybody has more questions they want to ask you, what's the best way they can get in touch with you?
Of course, my email would probably be the best. It's richard@deerfootcoc.com. Also, if you'd like to comment, whether this is live or also commenting after the fact, we will go back and look at the video and make sure that whatever questions you have based on what we have been discussing, we will answer your questions. And something that we've also decided to do is to take on some of the questions from our high school youth group. And so those questions will become even more advanced than second grade questions. And so maybe we'll provide more opportunities for you to ask your questions, and we want you to ask them so that we can answer your questions.
Absolutely. No, it'll be fantastic. And before we go, a couple of things I want to mention. Number one, shout out to everybody watching as we're recording this at a Friday morning at 7 o'clock in the morning. Got a lot of folks that jumped in and watched this morning. And Justin Hudson said, hi, Richard. So wanted to make sure you saw that. and the second thing is we now have this all of these shows available as a podcast. If you open your favorite podcast app and search Plant and Water from Deerfoot Church of Christ, you will find it. You can subscribe and get these episodes weekly. We'll get them posted as soon as the recording is done when we do these live each and every week. So, Richard, looks like we had another great show. Thanks so much. And it looks like the birds were cooperating with you this morning in your backyard.
They were. They were. I had a couple cardinals, and I think I even had my chipmunk come by for you. So,
maybe he'll make a cameo appearance next time. So
yeah, he's our buddy Al.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thanks, Richard. We'll see you next week.
All right, see you, brother.